welcome and thank you for being with us today for our first of our summer film series. We hope that you have had the opportunity to watch For They Know Not What They Do. And we are so thrilled and so honored to have two esteemed guests with us today. The filmmaker himself, I already mentioned his name, Dan Karslake is with us, as well as Bishop Gene Robinson, who I've already learned, and I will go ahead and share it with others, that he has asked us to call him Gene. And we're just going to start by allowing each one of them to say hello and introduce themselves. We aren't reading any formal statement of who they are. We'll just let them share a little bit as we get going, and then we have some initial questions to get the conversation rolling, and then again we hope to engage with your questions that you have brought to this conversation today. So again, welcome to everyone, and thank you especially Dan and Gene for being with us today. Dan, would you mind starting and just sharing, introducing yourselves and sharing with us today?
Sure. Thank you so much, Emily. My name is Dan Karslake. I want to thank Emily and Izzy for being so instrumental in putting this together. This all started with a conversation with my dear friend here in Berlin, Courtney McHill, who's also on the call. So thank you to Courtney too. It wouldn't be happening without you. I'm an American documentary filmmaker. I live in Berlin with my husband. We've been here since 2014. I directed and produced For They Know Not What They Do as a follow-up to my first film, which was called For the Bible Tells Me So. And it was during that process that I first met Bishop Gene Robinson, and he became a dear, dear friend of mine, of ours. So it's really great to be here. I'm thrilled that you all have seen the film and that it could raise a bit of money for your work. I support you 1000%. One quick anecdote. I remember, I think it was either 2007 or 2008 when your general conference was in Fort Worth, Texas, and there was a United Methodist Church donor who arranged for a huge screen on the side of a Mack truck to be right outside the entrance to the convention center, and For the Bible Tells Me So played on a loop outside of the convention center, because there was a lot of hope during that general convention that things might change. Sadly, things have not gotten better. And that's why you guys exist, and you're fighting the good fight, and I support it 1000%. So I'm thrilled and honored to be here, and I look forward to the conversation.
Great, thanks, Dan. Gene, will you share a bit with us?
Sure. I'm Gene Robinson. Currently, I'm the Vice President of Religion and Senior Pastor at the Chautauqua Institution in far western New York. Normally, we would have, at any given time, 8,000 to 10,000 people on our grounds as part of a 9-week program. But on the 1st of May, the decision was made to cancel all of our on-the-grounds programming and to do everything online. So we've been going forward at breakneck speed to get ready for this, and it's going well. And old fogies like me are learning lots about technology, none of which I learned in seminary, and so that's actually kind of exciting. I've been an Episcopal priest since God was a little kid, and in 2003 I was elected bishop to lead serve a life the Diocese of New Hampshire. I think it's fair to say that caused a bit of a disturbance around the United States and certainly around the Anglican Communion worldwide. But I lived to tell the tale, and that's a great thing. And my family was one of the 5 families not depicted. We were ourselves. It wasn't like a made-up family. We were one of the families in Dan's first movie, For the Bible Tells Me So. And I guess what I would just say about this this film and the one who preceded it, but especially this film, because it's coming out now, there are probably a lot of people, most of them either living on one of the two coasts.
It looks like we've lost Gene for a second, but I trust that he'll be able to log back.
I'm back.
You're
Great.
back already. There.
I am. I don't know. I am on Zoom every day, and that is the first time that's happened. So
That's
I don't
okay.
know
We're glad to have you back.
why. But yeah, okay. So I was just going to say, if you live on one of the two coasts or in a big city, you probably are wondering why this film needed to be made. Because, you know, my God, we have marriage equality. Why are we still talking about reparative therapy and families that reject their kids based on religion and so on and so forth? And this film, aside from being just a great film, is a reminder that this work is not over, and not every LGBTQ person lives on a coast or in a gay bubble somewhere. Again, I'm back again. Am I back?
Indeed
I
are.
better say what I have to say quickly. So that's why this movie is still timely. It's something that your network and ours as well has been working for a very long time to not need anymore, but that time is not yet.
Thank you for sharing that, Gene. That's a great setup for our conversation. I know that many will come with questions in that exact direction. Dan, I wondered if you would kind of continue us and maybe for those that are joining the call that maybe watched this film a week ago or maybe need a refresher, if you would just in your own words, I'd love to hear you just give a brief overview of the film to help refresh and give us a framework as we continue in conversation, if you don't mind.
Sure, absolutely. So For They Know Not What They Do is a follow-up to For the Bible Tells Me So. And when we decided to make this second film, one of my first conversations actually was with Gene in Washington, where he lives. We decided to try to really hit a lot of the stuff we missed with the first film. You know, For the Bible Tells Me So premiered at Sundance in 2007, and we did our best to include the conversation that was happening at that time. Well, the conversation has changed a great deal 8 years, 9 years later. So we really wanted to include different stories. It's still a movie about family. It's still a movie about loving your child, however that looks to you, especially when faith is in the mix. But this time we wanted to have a couple of families of faith that had trans kids. That was extremely important to me to do, because that's not a discussion we had with the last film. And conservative Christians have really taken on the transgender community in a very disturbing, dark sort of way. So we wanted to have at least a couple families of trans kids, families of faith with trans kids. We also had watched the religious freedom movement, quote unquote, gain great steam in the US over the last few years, winning at the Supreme Court level, all very alarming. This sort of new version of what religious freedom has always meant in this country. So we wanted to take that on and have a really clear discussion from our side, how religious freedom we feel should be seen and how it's being kind of bent to the purposes of certain communities in a very negative, oppressive way. We also wanted to deal with conversion therapy. Exodus International had closed its doors, saying that conversion therapy didn't work any longer in 2013. And yet, 2 new conversion therapy ministries have grown up in its place that are now bigger than Exodus ever was. That was a huge concern. We wanted to hit that too. And finally, it was really important to me personally to have a story from the Latinx community. I know a lot of Latinx people within our community, and I knew that the US press especially is very invested on this image of sort of uber macho Latin men. And so I loved, there's a story in this film of a young gay boy who is desperately scared to come out to his macho construction foreman father, but his father ends up being the unconditional love story in the film. He immediately accepted him, and as his mother did. And I just love that they're the story in this movie that really just immediately embraced who Vico was. So we had some very specific ideas of what we wanted to include in this film. There was one other story that ended up not being included. It was a Mormon story, Church of the Latter-day Saints, for various reasons, mostly because the film was challenging enough to cut with 4 stories. These are sort of like tapestries that are very difficult to weave together. I was lucky enough, thank goodness, to get our editor. We had the same editor who cut for the Bible Tells Me So, Nancy Kennedy, who I think is the best editor in the business. We weren't able to integrate the Mormon story, but we will do something with that material as well, because as we know, this issue is very difficult for young LGBTQ plus Mormons. So yeah, that's a little introduction, probably a little longer than you wanted.
No, that was wonderful. Thanks for sharing that. And kind of along those lines, and this is for both Jean and Dan, maybe, but each of you could take a moment to reflect in this. But as you were just talking about some of the subjects, the participants, and the film, those were some incredibly raw and personal stories that were being unfolded for us as the viewing audience. And just wonder for each of you, what are some of the stories that you'll never forget as this film was being made and produced? So if we'd love to just hear you share a little bit about kind of some of the side stories, maybe even, but stories that are sticking with you even now.
So the story that I have to tell is a wildly distressing one. Dan and I were filming an interview as part of the film at St. Albans Episcopal Church that sits right on the grounds of the Washington National Cathedral. And it was a beautiful day, except that there was a wind like you cannot believe. And every time I opened my mouth to speak, the roofing just shook and flapped and made this huge sound. And it took us forever to do the interview because it was so loud. And then it was so bad that we got tickled by the whole thing. So every time it happened, we would have to pause for several minutes just to have a good laugh. That's clearly not an important story, but it is the first story that I do remember about helping with this film. The more substantive thing, of course, was Sarah McBride, who's one of the 2 trans people in the story. I got to know because when I finished my work as Bishop of New Hampshire in 2013, I became a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress. And Sarah was on our LGBTQ team there. And she's really responsible for my education on everything trans, because I think we probably all have friends like this, but she was the person I could ask anything about being trans, and she knew that my heart was in the right place. So if I didn't use quite the right words, she would tell me why those weren't quite the right words and then answer my question. And so it was really, really a wonderful relationship, and I'll always be grateful to her for that. And part of my work there at the Center for American Progress was, as Dan mentioned earlier, the conservative religious right sort of knows they lost the gay thing, and so they've turned their sights on transgender people. And so I convened a group of trans clergy and laity, Jewish and Christian, and wound up writing a theology of what arguing for the full inclusion of transgender people in the life of the church and synagogue. And that may have seemed like a strange thing to do, and I certainly asked my trans colleagues about, you know, a cisgender man like myself and a white one to boot, writing this, and did that seem offensive? And their point was, you know, we need allies who will stand up for us in places where we're not yet welcome. And I remember the importance of allies to the gay and lesbian community at a time when we weren't welcome in a number of places. So that was just a piece of work I did based on the relationship really with Sarah. And then Dan interviewed her and her family as part of this. And you know, I do actually believe she'll be at least the governor of Delaware someday, and probably make a run for the presidency, because she is a force to be reckoned with.
Boy, that's the truth. I just have to say, Jean's first story about shooting in the choir loft. So we were up in the choir loft of St. Albans, which is a church which has a very old wooden shingle roof. And he is not kidding that, I mean, I think there were actually tornadoes in and around Washington that day. And it's just a testament to he is such a trooper, and he's so good at this that anyone else would have gotten up after the second or third hour and just said, I give up, you know, you're going to have to come back. But he just kept going. We were thinking of actually showing the whole interview on one of our DVD extras, because it's actually hysterical, mind-blowing, and he's so good at it. So that is one of my favorite memories. I think another memory that isn't really a favorite memory, but it was really significant. The reality is that I sort of fall in love with everyone in my films. I spend a lot of time with them. They open up in ways that are so amazingly generous and powerful, because documentary really needs authenticity more than anything. If people aren't being authentic, it just doesn't ring true. And these four families I'm just so grateful for. But initially, I'm going to give away a spoiler now for those of you who haven't seen the film. I kind of hate to do this, but I think it's important. I mentioned Vico, who's the Latinx boy who came out to his father. Ultimately, Vico then went to college and got his first job and moved out, got his first apartment, which he was the first one in his family to ever do that, have his own living space. He had a big housewarming, and the night of the housewarming, it was very successful. Lots of friends came, but it was getting too late. It was getting around after midnight, and they were still too loud. So he suggested to his friends, let's all go out to a club. And it was Latin night at a local club called Pulse nightclub. And later that night, a gunman came in and killed 49 people, including a number of the people that he took to Pulse. So I initially was very clear that I did not want to mention Pulse in the film. I wasn't attracted at all to Vico's story because I met him after Pulse because he was a survivor, but I loved his story because his father immediately loved him. And I said in my first few times with he and his family that I didn't really want to talk about Pulse. I didn't think it was necessary. It felt exploitive. I just didn't feel like that needed to be part of this film. But then, you know, movies like this take 4 and 5 years to make. And a year or a year and a half passed, and I was traveling around the US shooting different things. And I was starting to realize that people were forgetting Pulse, because there'd been so many other shootings in America since Pulse that when Pulse would come up, someone would say, well, oh, is that the one in Las Vegas? Which one was that again? And it started really bothering me that people were forgetting about this particular horrific experience, particularly because there's religion all over that, right? There was religion behind the gun. There was definitely religion in front of the gun, because so many of these young people who were at Pulse that night this was their safe space. This was church for them. They wouldn't have been welcomed in their parents' Catholic churches the next morning, that Sunday morning. So I went back to Vico and his parents and had long conversations about how would they feel if we told about the fact that he had been at Pulse. And they were just immediately on board, because they had really felt like the only media that had been done about Pulse was one of the Spanish language programs actually did a movie about Pulse, and it's called like Bloodbath or something really horrible, and it was very, like, it was sort of roundly hated and offensive. So I didn't even want to get near it, but they felt like if there was a kind of I don't want to say tasteful, but powerful yet limited view of what happened there, just so people will never forget, because movies have shelf lives. We've seen that with For the Bible Tells Me So. Movies are around for a long time, and I just felt really like we wanted to memorialize what happened to him and what happened to that community. I loved how Orlando came together after Pulse, but that really was not initially in the plan at all. It was really a later decision, and I'd love to hear anybody's feedback about how they felt about that. It's important to me that Pulse is never used in any of the marketing. We never really talk about it, because I don't want it to appear like we want people, if they hear it's about Pulse, they'll go see it. We don't want to use it as a marketing ploy or something like that, but it felt important. So that's kind of one of the big decisions that we had to make.
Thanks, Dan and Jean, both for sharing some of those more intimate reflections. I just want to remind you all that this is a Q&A, and you need to feel welcomed and invited into it. So if you have a question that you have on your mind, please don't hesitate to put it in the chat section so that we can see it. And if you want to use your own voice to ask it, you're certainly welcome to do that too. Just simply let us know that by doing the raise your hand function. But Ophelia is gonna, she's been watching and has a couple of questions that she'll throw into the space at this time.
Sure. This question is for either of you, Daniel or Jean. Dan, you just shared a really poignant reflection about how to respectfully and authentically engage people's whole beings and stories. And I love that the vehicle of the documentary asks folks to look not at aggregates, as sometimes folks can do with a community in which they are not a part, but you're asking people to just look at normal human lives. But this is a question about the more aggregate side of things. So Jennifer Galovich asks, we were wondering whether the families in the film were unusual. Are there any data about what percentage of conservative Christian parents of LGBTQ children have had a change of heart about LGBTQ issues? So I would maybe open this up also to be, are there statistics, or do you have any anecdotal evidence from either of you about conservative Christian parents who have had a change of heart?
Jean, do you want me to take this?
Yeah, I will. I'll say a word about your interviewing style after.
Okay, so all of my information is anecdotal. I will say that I talk to a lot of people before I settle on who will be in a film. And my anecdotal experience has been that there are a great many conservative Christian parents of LGBTQ people who at the very least privately shift in a very significant way the way they see their faith, the way they see how the Bible speaks about our community, my community. Often those people don't have the strength or I'm not sure what the word is. I want to say strength to allow their community, their church community, to know that, because often it feels like a loss to them that they've discovered that they have an LGBTQ child, and then the prospect of them losing their church community, their church family as well, seems very daunting. But it is very rare in my experience where any conservative Christian meets someone who is important to them in their life, who they discover is LGBTQ, that it doesn't alter them in some way, in some significant way. It's the power of, we hear this all the time, it's the power of coming out. All of a sudden it becomes less of a political issue and it becomes more of a human issue. And that happens more than we know. I think the Robertsons in our film are exceptional in a couple of ways, in that they had that experience. Their experience was extremely challenging. All the way through, they felt like they were coming from love because that was what their church community was saying. And then it ends in tragedy. Many couples at that point turn inward and aren't able to really consider this idea that maybe they actually were wrong. That I definitely know a number of parents, couples and single parents whose child came out, ended in tragedy, and they just couldn't possibly face the idea that they had also been wrong. So they stay in their church, they stay quiet. They may have changed their own idea of how to love an LGBTQ person, but they don't have the courage to then really be public about their change of heart. That's what, for me, made Linda and Rob so special. There are other examples of that, but mostly, I think people can't help but be changed, especially when it's a child or a sibling or a parent, if it's in a family. I'll tell you one quick anecdote of something that happened with For the Bible Tells Me So. I was invited to a very large Presbyterian church in Colorado Springs, Colorado, for a screening of For the Bible Tells Me So. And I said yes, only because Colorado Springs is where Focus on the Family is. And it's a very conservative part of the world. And I always tried to go anywhere that I perceived as more conservative to be with the film, because generally when the director's there, a few more people might show up. Anyway, I didn't know it until I got there, but this Presbyterian church, the reason I was invited by a group of 12 couples from this huge Presbyterian church, conservative church, and they sponsored a screening of the movie. And at the end of the screening, these 12 couples came up on the stage to reveal that they each had a gay or lesbian child to their congregation. They used that moment to come out to their church. I will never forget that, because it's a huge leap of courage to do that often. So all we can do as LGBTQ people and allies is hold those people as much as we can and encourage them, because the power, I was watching the congregation realize, because I was on the stage with them, looking at the congregation, watching the congregation realize as they each stood up individually, like one at a time, watching people change in that moment. So never underestimate the power of coming out. I'll stop there.
Yeah, following up on that, what Dan says is certainly true of my parents. And I think those of us who are LGBTQ often forget that our parents coming out is at least as traumatic as our own. And my parents were scared to death that they would lose every friend in our church. So, I mean, it didn't help that my picture was on the front page of every newspaper in the world, but so they couldn't exactly, claim not to know. And by that time, by 2003, there were several of their friends who actually called up to deliver the message, "Wow, you must be so proud of him." And they were stunned that they would get that kind of message as opposed to a condemnation. The thing I want to tell you about Dan and the way he has made these two films is I actually know how he does it, because he got my trust the same way. I mean, he at the time when my security was the toughest and nobody could get to me because of all the death threats and stuff. Dan got in my office. I mean, he literally sweet talked every person between the front door and me, and made it into my office to make his pitch. And but that's what he does with these families. And I will tell you from my own experience, Dan got my parents to talk about things and to say things that they have never said to me before or since. It is, I mean, when I saw the film, I was aghast at how honest he got them to be. And I don't think just anybody could set out to make a film like this and make it happen, or make it something you would sit through and it would feel like it was only 10 minutes long because you were so glued to the screen. And it's just a skill that Dan has, and a sensitivity that is just a part of who he is, that breeds that kind of trust in the people that he's interviewing.
Wow, these are very powerful stories, and we are very thankful. There's another question here from Jennifer, maybe a follow-up to the stories of the people who are on the film. Where do you know where they are now? I think this is for both of you. I'm pretty sure both of you keep in touch, and maybe you still keep in touch with those that were on the film. Do you have any developments or updates on? We could be fans of them as well.
So these people are all family to me now, so I talk to all of them all the time. It's important to note that tomorrow is the anniversary of Ryan Robertson's passing. So just keep them in your prayers tomorrow. I don't think it ever gets easier for them. But good news, Elliot, the young mixed-race trans boy in the film, who is just spectacular. When we see him last in the movie, he's about to start his freshman year in college, and he has the most amazing story, So he's a trans man, but was not particularly out about that as he was, looking toward college. So they had to, he had to go through this process. Now they do it on social media where you pick your roommate, right? And so he's a trans man, but he's presenting as a man, right? Not a trans man. So he spent a lot of time on the Facebook page for his freshman group, and started talking to various different guys and got it down to a couple, and sort of just really liked this one guy. And he was very nervous about how is he going to tell this guy, Mike, that he's trans, and oh my goodness. And it was getting really close. And I was talking to him a lot about that. And he wondered if maybe he should send him a link to the film. And I said, no, I think you should tell him first. I don't think it's a good way to come out in the movie. So he finally gets this guy on the phone, and, he's like, yeah, I think we'd be really good roommates. And Mike's like, I agree. We have a lot of the same interests, and, I think it could be really good. And I'm really looking forward to getting to campus next week. It was really late. And he said, yeah, well, before we do, I just want to know where you are in a couple issues. And he said, yeah, like what? And I said, well, Elliot said, where are you on the LGBTQ community? Because I'm really supportive. And the kid goes, Mike goes, well, I better be okay because I'm trans. Isn't that amazing? Out of all, I don't know how many trans kids are in his freshman class, but they found each other. And so it's been this amazingly great, wonderful thing for him. I wish I had recorded the conversation when he called me to tell me what happened. I mean, talk about joy. And talk about being able to see each other for truly who God made them to be. I just love that. So he's doing well. Vico is also doing well. Vico in Orlando, he actually went into drag and became a really amazing drag performer. And he just started a new job in an emergency room in a hospital in Florida. He was in a laboratory, mostly doing COVID tests for the last 4 months. But now he's gotten a promotion and is in a great new job in an emergency room. The McBrides are doing well. Sarah is in the middle of her first run for office. She's running for state senate in Delaware. It's looking great. She's already been going for about 6 months, way ahead of her. She's going to leave her opponent in the dust. She kind of already has. As Jean said, she will absolutely be the first trans governor, if not the first trans president. I see her really often on Zoom because we're often being interviewed together. She seems to be doing really well. You know, other than the anniversary, Rob and Linda Robertson are doing well. You know, we screened in the Seattle Queer Film Festival, and they brought to the screening something like 7 out of the 12 lead clergy at their conservative evangelical megachurch, because they're trying to shift their church to be affirming. They're staying in their church to do that. And out of the 7 that came, 5 of them that evening shifted. They didn't know the Robertson story at all. They just knew them as congregants. So it was really powerful for them. I think, again, don't underestimate people who are within some of the most conservative communities. You know, there's a group called the Reformation Project that trains people within conservative religious communities to learn how to talk to people in their congregations. I don't know if it's something that you guys have utilized at all, Matthew Vines' organization, but it's done some really good work. Who have I missed? Who else? The Robertsons, the McBrides, yeah, that's all 4. So everyone's doing well. Everyone's doing really well.
Jean, did you want to share anything before I go to the next question?
Just one very quick thing. So when Sarah left the Center for American Progress to go and be the national communications director for the Human Rights Campaign, we had a little party for her, and we had T-shirts made up. I think on the front of it said something like, Sarah McBride for president or something. But on the back, it said, "I'm a McBridesmaid." So we all have our McBridesmaids T-shirts, and we have them neatly packed away for when we go to her inauguration.
That's wonderful. Y'all are sharing some great stories with us. We appreciate it so much. This one is something that both of you have spoken to a bit, acknowledging both the diversity that you were seeking to include in this next film. But we'd love to hear you reflect a little bit on what you see as some of the growing edges of the movement for LGBTQ justice and inclusion. As you've had interviews, as you've met with people, as you've been doing your own work, what do you see as being some of the growing edges for the movement for LGBTQ folks towards justice and inclusion?
Yeah, let me start with that. I preached on this at a couple of Pride events this year, which the theme of which was this: we have our own issues, we have our own challenges, we have our own things to celebrate, et cetera, et cetera. But it's time also for many of us to reach out beyond our community and to use what we've learned in the experience of being LGBTQ and become allies of other movements. And in particular, in June especially, but still, of course, we're talking about Black Lives Matter and people of color in general. And I think we were absolutely right to focus on our own stuff first, but I think it is a sign of maturity of our movement if we start showing up in other justice movements, just to be ourselves, right? Not to insert our issues onto another group, but just to be seen there, supporting and upholding and being a force within someone else's movement. And we certainly can't expect anyone to show up to support our issues if we're not out supporting other people. And it just felt, you know, the expressions of feeling and injustice and all of that were going on in the streets. I just didn't feel I could preach a pride sermon and not mention that and make some kind of a connection between us. I mean, when I see an LGBTQ person being sexist or racist or whatever, you know, I want to grab them and shake them and ask, you know, haven't you learned anything, you know, from this experience, really? So I think that's a cutting edge for us to take our own experience and what we've learned from it and go big.
Yeah, I completely agree with Gene. You know, the intersectionality of all of these movements has always been there, but we're really finally, we need to really pay attention this time and really stand up for all people who are oppressed in whatever way in our society. And we've been given this amazingly powerful opportunity to do that. It's come from such tragedy, but so much good can come from it. And the intersectionality is just cannot be denied. So absolutely, amen.
Thank you both. This is a question that is for you, Gene.
Okay.
Pat, Luna. Gene, this isn't about the movie exactly, but as a bishop in a denomination way ahead of us, what advice would you offer to us about caring for LGBTQIA+ folks after a denomination votes for full inclusion? We remain hopeful, so how do we learn from mistakes made by the Episcopal Church as you moved from polity and legislation to practice and living into inclusion?
Wow. So this is going to be a 5-hour Zoom meeting.
Sure. Yep. In the next 10 minutes.
Gosh, just to catch you up, we just consecrated our 5th openly gay partnered bishop. So that's pretty astounding. It took 7 years between mine and the next one. But I think that was partly because, you know, the world was a different place, right? And the world was changing all through that time. And so now we're just in a very different place. I think one of the things that we all need to do is to remind ourselves that we're not going to do any of this perfectly, and that's okay, and that's okay with God as well. I think we should never, ever, ever forget those people that you're separating from or who separated themselves from us. We lost about 100,000 people out of 2 million around my consecration. And to this day, I pray for them. And I wonder what some of them are thinking now that the world has changed so much. You know, would they leave today if it happened? So, and I think some of them wouldn't, because they've been changed over the last, it's been, 17 years since my consecration. So, so never forget them, and never underestimate, you know, believe them when they tell you how painful this is for them. And I know that some of them who are in pain about this will choose to stay with you, right? And not go with the other group. And just because they stayed doesn't mean they're not in pain about this. So don't be blind to them. They they're having trouble with this. They don't believe it's worth leaving their church over, but they're still having trouble with this. So you've still got a ministry right within your own denomination. And then I think underlying all of it is, demonstrate to them what a good Methodist you are. You don't have to be talking about LGBTQ stuff. If you're acting as a faithful member of your congregation and living your life in a faithful way, that will speak louder than probably anything you can actually say in words to them. And then I guess the last thing is, don't ever forget that God wins, that love wins, right? No matter what it might look at the moment, or no matter how the two sides may regard each other, whatever, at the end of the day, God is going to win. And if God wins, it means love wins. And so if you have some setbacks, so be it, because you know how it's going to end, and so you can take those setbacks in stride.
Well, thank you so much for those hopeful words. We're going to keep on knocking on that door, Gene. Here's a question for both of you. It might be our last question. Talking about resources. Some people are looking for maybe a study guide for this, but generally, aside from this film, are there any other resources that you could recommend, especially for conservative Christian parents who have a child who has come out? For both of you.
I'll start. I think there are a lot of really good resources. There are other films that I've seen that I've really respected, and films that are being made right now. I'm a filmmaker, so I love film, and I always try to push film. But I mentioned, there's Boxer. It's Gene's dog, Boxer. Anyway, there's a pretty powerful book called God and the Gay Christian by the young man that I mentioned earlier, Matthew Vines, who started the Reformation Project. That book has gotten a lot of penetration into more conservative areas because he himself, Matthew, is quite conservative. So that's a book that, depending on sort of the level of the conservative nature of the people you're talking about, I think that's a really good resource. We will have a study guide for this film that's created by the Human Rights Campaign, and we're hoping with For the Bible Tells Me So, North Haven UMC in Dallas helped us create an amazing, more conservative Bible study called This I Know, that has been used in a really wonderful way based on the first film. And we're hoping to find a congregation or a group to do the same thing again, because again, the people that we most want to reach speak this language. So if there are Bible studies based on these films or based on books, I think those can be also very, very useful. I should have, I have a whole library of books that if I were in the right room, I could read the titles, but they're not right here. I can post them somewhere though, if that's helpful. They're really, the number of resources just in the last 5 years has really been heartening to me.
Thanks, Dan. That's helpful. And we plan on staying connected to you and your work, and so hopefully we can continue to learn with and from each other. I do want to try to squeeze in one more question. I know it's our time is getting close, but Jennifer has posted one more question that we'd love to hear your responses to. So this might be a good place for us to kind of culminate our time together today. And that question is, how can churches create safe spaces for adult parents of LGBTQIA youth, young adults, speak up and come out to others as they speak up and come out to others? Could y'all speak to the creating safe spaces for adult parents for a moment with us?
this is not like a full-blown plan, but it's a piece of, I think, building that. I often will, in talking to clergy, I will say, you have to send some signals from the pulpit, preferably, or certainly when you're speaking in general, that indicates that you would be positive toward anything like that happening. And because you can just simply assume that there are people sitting in front of you in the pews who are in that situation. They're feeling isolated because there's nobody to talk to, and they don't know if this is a safe place. So I think it's not just clergy. I think it's all of us can send signals that when you're ready to talk, I'm here for you. I will do everything I can to make this a safe space, and you won't be alone in this. I will stand with you. And I think you obviously have to honor their decision about when and how to come out as the parent of an LGBTQ person. But I think the more people in the congregation that can make that send that kind of signal, at some point you cross a line where you feel like, even if it's not safe, there are people who are going to stand up for me, right? And so I think that's just a way of getting the ground ready for that kind of seed.
Yeah, and I would just agree with Gene completely and say something that he says so well often, and that is that it's very powerful for the LGBTQ person to come out. It is often equally as powerful for the ally to come out in their church environment, especially. There are a lot of ways to be an activist. One is to very simply and whenever you have the chance, just tell your story of how you became an ally. Because again, the people that need to hear that story can see themselves in you, possibly a bit more than they can see themselves in the LGBTQ person. So don't underestimate that. The power of allies is huge. For the Bible and this film, a lot of people say, well, we really like it, but it's really preaching to the choir. You're preaching to the choir. And my response is always, well, the choir is not singing loud enough. We need to wake up the choir and they need to talk, because the more people in a church environment at fellowship hour or in whatever way, it doesn't have to be loud and proud. It can be intimate. But telling your stories of how you became allies are some of the most powerful stories that exist.
May I offer a suggestion? The church I attend, the Walnut Creek United Methodist Church, Walnut Creek, California, we're reconciling. We also allow the Rainbow Community Center from Concord to have events in our social hall. Mm-hmm. So, we make our facilities available to LGBTQ organizations.
Yeah, wonderful. The partnerships can be a powerful witness in and of themselves for certain. Well, we are at our time, and we are just incredibly grateful again to you, Dan, the filmmaker, the producer, and for Gene for being available to us and our community that is seeking justice in a variety of ways in our own context. You have shared beautifully with insights and reflections that certainly help to inspire our own work, as we know that we have work to do in front of us. So thank you so much for the gift of your time and your presence. Your witness and work have it continues on to make a powerful impact. Many of you have asked questions about viewing this film with others. We will get clarification on that. We are a unique group right now, correct, Dan, who has had the honor of seeing this film that was initially scheduled to be shown in a public sense, but due to COVID, that changed things, and Dan invited our group in this specific way. So that will become more and more available as time passes, but you can still view the film with the link that has been advertised. So we would invite you to, if you haven't seen it, to view it. And again, we'll continue to advertise about other study guides and questions that have come up as we've had this conversation. And like I said, this is the first of our summer film series. We are developing and excited about some other films that we will view in a variety of different ways with other partners in the summer. So stay tuned for that being a way that you can resource your community and yourself as we all seek to grow and be nurtured in the work of justice and inclusion. So again, if we can do a spirit hands or a clap for Dan and Jean, and thank them again for them sharing their time with us today. And we look forward to continue to engage with one another in the days and weeks and months and years to come. May it be so. Amen. Thank you
Thanks so much,
for joining us.
everyone.
Peace be with you
Thanks,
all.
everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care.